there were a lot of people who did not watch the Twins this summer. Attendance at the ballpark's flat from last year.
Star Tribune Twins beat writer Bobby Nightengale Jr. joining us right now. Bobby, great to see you, and not great to watch the Twins right now. So let's just start nice and basic. What the heck is going on during this slide?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those, anything that can go wrong is going wrong. They're not playing good defense. Outside of Pablo Lopez and Bailey Ober, the pitching's inconsistent. And the offense is gone. I mean, they're just averaging fewer than 3 runs a game, I think, over the past week, averaging they barely scored 4 runs a game anytime in the past 3 weeks. So, I mean, it's just one of those, they have no offense. Defense isn't playing great in tight games. The bullpen's let them down a couple times, not having inconsistent starts. Add it all together, and they've won 6 of the last 21 games. And that huge buffer they had in the wild card race, if Boston or Seattle or Detroit was playing a little bit better, they'd be in a more uncomfortable position. But 3 weeks left in the season, they're definitely in trouble.
Can you explain what it's like to cover Rocco Baldelli, the manager of the team, on a daily basis, and how different that experience was this past weekend?
Yeah, I mean, he's usually a pretty loose guy. I'd say, players type manager. Not afraid to call guys out when it's warranted, but when they got swept by Kansas City over the weekend, that was one where we knew there was some yelling in the clubhouse. You could hear it outside. Didn't know who was doing it. Found out it was Rocco afterwards, but you could hear some loud noises through the clubhouse doors when the media wasn't let in yet. And then when we went into his office for his post-game press conference, he said, he goes, "I don't know if you want to turn the cameras on because I'm not going to say anything." And then we said, "Okay, no questions or just no cameras?" And he goes, "This is my only comment. That was the most unprofessional series of baseball we played, and that's my only comment. And I have nothing else to say. That just probably says enough." And then we left the room. But that's he did it once last year when they were struggling. They got swept by Atlanta, and he said no players were going to talk post game. Kind of closed the clubhouse and let the players talk amongst themselves. So it's not the first time he's kind of had like an abrupt press conference, but in that private team meeting behind closed doors, players said that's the maddest they've ever seen him. So, definitely kind of sums up kind of how the weekend went against Kansas City, where they scored 2 runs in 3 games.
This is all stuff we know as Twins fans. We all know that they're struggling. They can't hit 6-21. Like, where do they go from here? How do they go 1-0 tonight? How do they go? I mean, they really only have to go play 500 ball the rest of the way because the teams behind them aren't playing that well. But where do they go from here?
Yeah, I mean, that's the question. I mean, fortunately, they have Pablo Lopez starting tonight, and he's been as good as anybody in the second half of the season. So they have confidence anytime he takes the mound. I think he's 6-1 since the All-Star break record-wise. But outside of that, they just have to get better offensive production, and right now they haven't had anyone step up. They got some good injury news on Carlos Correa and Byron Buxton that they both should be back this season, maybe within the next week or two. So that's at least on the horizon. But right now, I mean, offensively, they just need someone to step up. I mean, Willie Castro was an all-star, and I think he has 1 hit in September. Royce Lewis, who, was as good as anybody when healthy over the past couple of years, is really, kind of hit a wall over the past month. It really doesn't look like himself. Is striking out a ton. And they just don't really have anyone in the lineup that stepped up. I mean, Carlos Santana might be their most consistent hitter over the last 3 weeks, and he's batting .211. So it's just one of those that they need better at bats. They're striking out a ton. Rocco Baldelli thinks they're expanding a lot. Just guys pressing, trying to make some things happen. Even third base coach Tommy Watkins has had some bad sends over the past couple weeks. I think they've had 3 or 4 guys thrown at the plate. Of those 4, probably 2 or 1 or 2 were even close. Guys thrown out by a mile. So. It's one of those, I think everyone's kind of pressing too much, and, they need a big performance outside of, probably start with Pablo Lopez having a good start, but need someone offensively just to have a good 2-3 game stretch.
Bobby, first of all, let me start with this. Royce Lewis doesn't slump. He told us that, remember? Like, he doesn't slump. He doesn't believe in it. Well, welcome to the big leagues, kid. Second of all, is Correa and Buxton coming back? It's going to be too late because, they're coming back in a week. There's week or 2 weeks. There's like 18, 19 games left. If you come back 10 days from now, you're coming back with a week. Will it be too late? I still think they get in because their lead still is larger than what you think it is. And if they win one of the games in Boston, then they should pretty much be in. But, man, like we didn't see this. And, again, is it going to be too late when Correa and Buxton finally do if they come back?
Yeah, I mean they're going to need him to play well when they come back, and that's the big question. After Buxton's missed close to a month, and Carlos Correa hasn't played since the All Star break. Like, what level of production can you actually get? But defensively, that should be where it makes a huge impact. I mean, Brooks Lease, they're starting shortstop right now. He's a fine defender, but he's had a few plays like trying to force things to make things happen in close games that have turned into errors. And center field, there's no one who plays center field like Byron Buxton for the Twins. So I think that's probably where they would make the biggest impact, even if they're not hitting as well as they were earlier in the year. But I agree with you. I mean, it's time's winding down. They need them back sooner than later. Next week's the big road trip. I mean, they have to get some wins this week on their homestand. They have the Angels and Reds this week. But next week they play at Cleveland for 4 games and at Boston for 3. And if playing the way they have, I mean, if that's a road trip where you only get 1 or 2 wins and Boston beats up on you, you're leading the wild card. Is they have a lot of tiebreakers in their advantage, but that's where the lead could be gone.
Yeah, can you explain the schedule the rest of the way and any tiebreakers that you do know about? I saw that they beat the Tigers and the Mariners in the season series. We addressed that at the top of the show. So they're technically 4 games up on both of those ball clubs. But Boston's the interesting one. So let's say they enter that Boston series up 2 games and then the Red Sox sweep them. They would have not only the edge in the standings, but the season series as well, right? Because they've played 3 times and then this will be 3 more.
Yeah, correct. So Twins took 2 of 3 from Boston earlier this year. So Boston can only win the season series, win the tiebreaker basically if they sweep, because the next one down goes to how you do in your division, and Twins have a better record there than Boston does in the AL East. So they'll basically win that if they end up, say Boston wins 2 out of 3, Twins will still have that tiebreaker. So that's a huge advantage. I mean, they beat up on teams they should have beat this season for the most part. Like sub 500 teams, they have the best record in baseball. They just haven't beat the teams that are better than them. They do finish the year with 3 games against Baltimore at home, which if, the way things are trending, if that's an important series for Baltimore, especially if they're locked up with the Yankees for like the 1 seed, that could be kind of a dangerous series for them. Also could turn into something where, maybe if the Twins get the last wild card also, that would be something where how do you kind of arrange your pitching schedule when you need to beat Baltimore in those type of games? So that could also loom as kind of a big series for that last weekend.
How much do you think this team has been hurt by the lack of ability to do anything at the trade deadline now for 2 consecutive seasons? It was certainly a disappointment last year, especially given the results of the ball club, looking like they could have potentially gone even further, right? But then this year, they do nothing again. And I'm curious how much it affects the clubhouse. I had heard that some players were pretty ticked about it, some of the vets that had been there for a minute. And even another layer to this conversation is, okay, if ownership is telling you you can't do anything at this time period because they're chopping down the budget for no reason, then should they be thinking about this in the off season and saying, hey, we need to leave like $5 to $7 million that can be spent extra towards the trade deadline for the rest of the season so that we can make moves like this?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was some talks of like Kikuchi, on a rental contract. I think that, there was legitimate interest there. I just think Houston had a better offer, offered 2 major league players, and I don't think the Twins were going to trade 2 guys off their major league roster, and probably weren't going to offer the prospects that were kind of the equivalent to that. So I do think there was some opportunities, but that was a swing and miss. I mean, you look at it, Joe Ryan, who was, probably their number 2 starter at the time, got hurt a week later, and he's out for the season. So, I mean, it's one of those that kind of spiraled on them. I think at the trade deadline, you looked at the offense and you were like, okay, they thought Carlos Correa would be back a lot sooner. Byron Buxton was still healthy at the time, so you felt offensively like, okay, there's not a huge need there. Starting pitching, there was definitely like, let's bolster some depth, and they were unable to get a deal done. But I think it goes back, I mean, payroll, you look at the offseason, they cut $35 million. They didn't have to end up doing kind of the, dump salary type trades, but they killed their depth. And I think that's kind of the biggest difference where they were last year, where they ended up winning the division. It was a really weak division last year. But I thought that team had a ton more depth than this current team that they have right now. They're playing a lot more, kind of guys that have spent their entire careers at AAA, and forcing them to playoff action, which I felt like last year they had guys stashed at AAA that kind of had some major league experience. So I think that's where it's kind of hurt them the most. Offseason, you lose your depth. Trade deadline comes, you don't reinforce that depth at all. Starting pitching, you had some injuries that you didn't expect right after the trade deadline, and now you're kind of in that position now where you're just kind of hanging on for dear life.
Hey, FT fam, it's Alana Rizzo. I can't stop talking about Vuori. Vuori is perfect if you are sick and tired of traditional old workout gear. I wear Vuori in all settings, not just in the gym, because honestly, it's comfier than whatever you're currently wearing. No joke. I'm wearing Vuori daily leggings right now. They're high-waisted with the drawstring and cupped ankles. They look good and they feel great. You're going to love them. Vuori is an investment in your happiness. For our listeners, they are offering 20% off your first purchase. Get yourself some of the most comfortable and versatile clothing on the planet at vuori.com/foul. That's VUORI.com/foul. Not only will you receive 20% off your first purchase, but enjoy free shipping on any U.S. orders over $75 and free returns. Go to vuori.com/foul and discover the versatility of Vuori clothing.
And my thing is with Kikuchi, if you're going for him and you're potentially trying to make the team like the Blue Jays eat the money as well because they can't take on extra cash, I mean, you kind of know you have no shot at a player like that. I'm just wondering if a team gets psychologically affected by not bringing in a boost of some kind. Like, you can't look at your ball club and say, hey, we're perfect. So unless we get Kikuchi for not much, then we're just going to go ride out the second half and we think we're winning a World Series. Like that mindset to me was wild.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the hands are tied when you don't have much payroll to add, but I think you're right. I mean, I do think it, affected the clubhouse. There definitely were guys who behind the scenes were frustrated by it, but I think it's one of those two that, I don't think things were as dire at the time. I mean, you go the first couple of weeks of August, they played great baseball. They were 17 games above 500 3 weeks ago. So they were kind of riding high, thought the division was a possibility. I mean, they were right there with Cleveland. And then everything fell off the track. I mean, no one expected Royce Lewis to hit the wall he has. Carlos Correa, at the time, everyone thought he'd be back right after the All-Star break. Byron Buxton was healthy at the time. So, I mean, obviously, injuries are going to kind of affect things the last 2 months of the season. But they're in a different – I think they're in a much different spot than they thought they'd be. And then when you combine it with the fact they didn't do anything at the trade deadline, I mean, the one trade they made was Trevor Richards, and they ended up, designating him for assignment 3 weeks into his time with the Twins. The bullpen's not as sturdy as it was. They could have definitely added there too. So, that's a swing and miss. And obviously, if they end up missing the playoffs, I think that's what everyone's going to point to is, you could have definitely bolstered this roster at the trade deadline, and you didn't.
All right, this question is going to have a follow-up, but it's just a yes or no. Do the Twins as an organization believe they build a team to win the World Series?
Yes.
Then who's going to get fired after this season if they don't make the playoffs, or if it's they limp in and they lose in the first round?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're a team that is like one of those get in and see what happens. I don't think it's World Series or bust that say you get in and you're firing somebody. But if you don't make the playoffs, I think, definitely somebody's got to be on the hot seat, right? I mean, I think front office is going to point to, payroll went down. I think Rocco Baldelli will point to all the injuries that happened. But I think when you look at it, I mean, coming into the season, I felt like they advanced past the wild card series. They won their first playoff series in 2 decades. Expectations were definitely higher, even with a lower payroll. It was a winnable division. I mean, I don't think anyone expected Cleveland to be as dominant as they have all summer, but credit to them for kind of running away with the division to this point, and Kansas City for coming back from a 100-loss season. But I definitely think, even with those circumstances, there's got to be some people on the hot seat. I don't know if firings will happen, but they have a 4-game lead in the wild card right now. If this continues for another 3 weeks and they completely choke and fall out of the playoffs, I definitely think the sense around the team will be a little bit different, and I'll be curious to see who kind of takes the brunt of the blame once that happens. But still 3 weeks to play.
Bobby, I got to ask this because having played in Minnesota, for a few years, what's the fan reaction to this? Because yes, I know they won their first playoff series, but it was kind of it wasn't like, it was a wild card series. It wasn't the same as like winning a 5 or a 7 game. It was a 3-game. They beat the Blue Jays twice. But is just getting to the playoffs, being the third wild card, is that enough? Is that enough for them? Now, I'm not saying they built a World Series team, but is that enough for the fans? Because Target Field's awesome. If you haven't been there, take a trip there and experience a game there. It's an awesome place. The Twins fans have packed it in, Twins territory, the whole deal. But is that enough to satisfy these fans? Fans are complaining when they cut payroll. Hey, we want to We won a playoff series. Now we're cutting payroll. So what's the feeling like on the ground?
Yeah, I think it's complete frustration. I mean, not only just the cutting the payroll, like you win a playoff series, the first thing you do in the offseason is come out and say, hey, we're not signing Sonny Gray again and we're cutting payroll. But I also think the TV deal was a huge swing and miss for them. Valley Sports, they had the Comcast where they weren't on air for 3 months. Comcast is the number one cable provider in the Twin Cities. So there were a lot of people who did not watch the Twins this summer. Attendance at the ballpark's flat from last year. And I think it was one of those out of sight, out of mind. And I think there's frustration just from that and saying, it was supposed to be a good team. I can't watch them, and now I don't really care about them. So I think that's one thing they're battling. Even if they were winning the division, even if they were playing great, I think that's still a concern. I still think there was frustration, even when they were 17 games above 500 a few weeks ago. I still think the general sense from the fan base was we're upset that we can't see the team. They're cutting payroll. The ownership doesn't really care about winning a World Series. They're just here to, win 85 games and call it a day and win a playoff series every 2 decades. So I think that was kind of the general sense. Now I think it's kind of generating pure rage in terms of just there's no way you can fall out of the playoffs after the team you had. Now it's starting to turn into like Carlos Correa, fans getting upset with how long he's been out. Byron Buxton's dealt with injuries. Royce Lewis struggling as much as he had. Now it's kind of like, okay, now what are we looking for in the future? Because if payroll doesn't go up and nothing's really going to change. I mean, attendance is still the same. TV deal's up again at the end of this year. Payroll-wise, I can't see anyone saying they're going to take a huge jump payroll. So it's kind of like, is this the best it's going to get? And I think that's kind of the sense from the fan base.
So let's try to finish glass half full. What's the best part of the Twins season so far? And maybe it's an individual with a breakout or something like that. But what's one really bright spot that's still getting talked about?
I mean, Griffin Jack's out of the bullpen's been as dominant as they could have asked for. Kind of been their setup man, but facing the top part of the middle of the lineup anytime he comes in. But he's really taken a stride forward. I mean, since the All-Star break, I think he's getting up runs in 2 appearances. Maybe even longer than that. Maybe the past 3 or 4 months he's given up runs in just a couple appearances. So he's been lights out. I mean, it's kind of made up for Joan Duran. Hasn't been as dominant as he was in the past. So that's probably been the biggest bright spot. Pablo Lopez they had high hopes for. Bailey Ober's taken a step forward pitching-wise. I think offensively, I mean, that's kind of where, I think there's a lot of guys they're hoping would take huge steps forward. Willie Castro did in the first half. But it's kind of left some to be desired. I mean, Byron Buxton, as hurt as he's been, I mean, him returning to center field and playing 90-plus games this year, I know it's frustrating now that he's, on the injured list, but if you would have said coming into the year he'd play 90 games in center after not playing center at all last year, I think they would have said that was a win.
Yeah, you got to kind of take that these days, given what's kind of been put together on the back of his baseball card over a long period of time. Much more analysis like this in the Star Tribune from Bobby. You can follow him at Nightingale JR. Bobby, thanks. Good to catch up with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Everybody, be sure to like and subscribe for more content.
We're back here every weekday, all year long, so do not miss an episode.
The videos are coming in all day. Here's another video you might enjoy.
Baseball the way it should be covered.